Hello everyone, it's Mike Levin. Wednesday, April 18th, 2018. Star Wars night. And I am here at about 15th Street, close to 16th Street, Union Square. We got the Barnes & Noble, Petco, where Billy and Sammy and Charlie all came from back on that corner. And I thought I'd take a go at shooting one of these videos on the Note 8 again, which I've been sort of conditioned out of doing because it shoots only about 10 minutes before it cops out. But I think I've freed up a lot of space on my phone, and I switched it from one of the phone's native aspect ratio resolutions down to normal HD, which it's interesting to be in the day where you have to switch things down to, I think, 1080 by 740, one of those resolutions, which is, which was the HD standard for a long time before 4K swept the world. And so, I like the I like the Android video app. I guess it's the Samsung video app because it's a Note 8. Because it has a pause, and I can actually do inline real-time live editing. I can pause, compose my thoughts, and come back to the same video, and then when I upload it to YouTube, it's still no video editing because I've already done the editing. I tend to do things in one take, and I will continue to do that, but there are times where you have to recover a train of thought. You know, you aren't really also instant recall as one would like to think. We're not really computers. We have to follow these threads of associations, and sometimes we've nested too deep, and you can come out of it unnesting like you would in certain programming environments, or you can just, on fail go to, such as they say in the old Visual Basic programming language, VB script, which made use of go-tos, which was really interesting. But better programming practices have prevailed, but even just the automatic notion that a go-to is a bad thing is exactly the kind of thinking that I want to bring into question. That's an easy, someone runs up behind you, and when you slow down a moment to change your direction, you get a mutter a G's under their breath. That's New York City. They don't think you have the right to alter your course on a sidewalk, or even just slow down by a bit if they're running and relying on you being in a certain place. So, so many directions I could go with this video, but I think one that I've really been meaning to talk about for a while is, why this video series, why really this barrage on all the media channels? Because I'm also on Twitter. I'm tweeting a book out, a paragraph at a time, now that the Twitter 280 character limit actually allows a tweet to contain a fully composed thought without being some sort of comedic compression genius, which I admit exists, and I do admire that kind of talent tremendously. I need more than a snippet, more than barely a sentence in my world in order to compose one coherent thought. One might call it rambling on, and that would be a fair assessment. I'm adjusting my route, by the way. This is some beautiful scenery around me. Let me see if I can get the lighting to show you. I cannot zoom in that mode. Too bad. So over there we've got the Empire State Building. There we go. And some other very beautiful buildings, but the camera's automatic lighting control. We have a similar beautiful view there, and one behind me. Maybe it'll do better with this. Yeah, no, not really. Anyway, I got the light. I'll keep walking. So the scenery around me while I walk through these videos, I admit is an interesting aspect of my whole online presence. And I tried podcasting for a while in the iTunes store, and whatever it is. There's so much ambiguity around these marketplaces. You know, what is iTunes and what is not. There's these blurred lines of demarcation. And really more and more I've been seeing that, you know, all this ecosystem lock-in stuff is fine and dandy so long as the services are around forever and you can still get your media again. So that's yet another topic. I had bought myself a NAS, which is still unboxed at home with two great big, I guess 4 terabyte Western Digital drives to set up a simple mirrored RAID array. I used to do RAID 1.0s, which used 4 drives and which were both mirrored and striped. So you got the benefit of read and write speeds, read and write at double the speed, and your data was also in 2 places at once. So that's really one of the best, and I want to make sure I'm going a desirable route. 4th Avenue is the avenue I want to walk down. We'll cut through NYU's campus while I get these thoughts out there. And I'm already 6 minutes in. What are these thoughts? Well, idea capture. There's a lot of ways to do idea capture, and they fit into your life varying degrees based on, you know, what you do during the course of the day. Some people can only fit Twitter as a medium in their life because it's that private little space on their phone where they won't have enough time to shoot out one tiny little thought. And I've been taking advantage of that, I have to admit, now that it's up to 280 characters and it's what I would call a paragraph. Whenever I have a complete thought that sort of forwards the progress of this Alice in Wonderland book, the world of technology, choices of programming language, how to use the tools to do programming so that you are spontaneously and effortlessly expressing yourself with coding without having any sort of tools getting in the way. It just sort of flows naturally, exactly the opposite of what my talk is doing right now. But you get the idea. You should be able to code with Python. Which, even just mentioning the name anymore has made me so hyper aware that it is a classic case of slipping an alpha male, chest thumping, you know, macho name in front of a programming language which is anything but. There are no extra lines of code in Python. Quite the contrary. Many lines of code are eliminated if you use that hanging outdented curly bracket style. If you use non-matching indent curly bracket styles, you can save yourself a line wrap by putting the curly bracket at the end of your last line of code at the expense of consistency and readability and certain indent rules that wouldn't be nice to follow. So there's always these compromises and trade-offs in all these languages that have curly brackets. It's when ALGOL went wrong. So it's part of the procedural lineage of programming languages. There are 4 great lineages of programming languages. They are procedural, as I just mentioned. There is Lisp, which is the dynamic meta programming language, where the separation of programming code and the data you store on the hard drive is blurred and erased, such that your running code is also data, and you can have self-modifying code, which is really powerful for machine learning systems. Lisp is very much coming back in style now that the rise of machines. Anyway, that's procedural, which was Algol, the granddaddy language. Dynamic, Meta, which was Lisp, and then there was COBOL, which was high-level business. You know, it uses the language of business. It knew about business rules, and it's what you would consider a high-level, abstract programming language, and is one of the places where Grace Cooper, another one of the places where women have vastly pushed forward the state of technology, of computing, by demonstrating to the people who made the hardware, hey, with just software, you can utterly and completely change the hardware abstraction layer such that you are programming more easily. So a language created specifically for a problem domain, the problem domain being business, that's COBOL, that's Grace Hopper. I got to get these names straight because they are, you know, part of a great story of the evolution of computers in which hardware makes some sort of advance through the laboratory, you know, rote, you know, experimental procedures. But now you've shrunken down the size requirements for things like mechanical switching, which we've been doing logical things with for a long time in the form of player pianos, automatic looms, and a whole series of devices that really go back in history quite far. We have no problem with building computing machines, never have. Switches and locks, canal locks, it's all the same stuff. And we just use them in such massive quantities now that all kinds of magical seeming properties emerge, emergent properties. And the hardware is being wired together a little differently in some cases, limited cases, but it's happening in the form of Google's tensor processing units, or TPUs. And inside every Apple iPhone X or 10, iPhone 10 I guess they call it, is a little bit of custom neural AI hardware. And the difference is that those old classical architectures that are single CPU biased, that are typically called the Harvard architecture, which is what's greatly in use everywhere, where the bus is divided up a certain way to allow simultaneous read writes, so long as you have a clear division between program running memory and long-term storage like hard drives. That was the Harvard architecture. And then the von Neumann architecture, which is quite a bit more robust in the tearing down of different types of memories so that all your program code can become all meta. But never really became popular because it tends to crash, and you don't like to commit things to hardware that tend to crash. So Harvard architecture and statically compiled languages running on Harvard architecture, i.e. the C programming language, because Unix was based on it, became massively popular, and the priesthood embraced this because C, and subsequently things like C++ and C# and Java, are not all that easy. They are difficult programming languages that require a lot of busy work before code really starts doing anything. Unlike Python, where you kind of trip and fall. Ooh, the Blue Man Group. Let me get this onto this video. This is one that Addie is definitely at that age where she's going to be very upset with and impressionable with these guys. I think I brought her to it before, but she was so young, she's not going to remember. So, yeah, nothing about the schedule here. I'll just look it up online. But this will be a good reminder in the video. I have a whole bunch of brochures I've been picking up for summer activities. I have to pick out her summer camps. And if I work from home on Fridays, I'll be able to drop her off at a summer camp in the morning and pick her up afterwards here at Snug Harbor. So it's an easy drive. I say here like I'm already on Staten Island, but you know, I'm getting used to a new landscape on many fronts. Areas of Manhattan, which as you see, I am getting used to. Oh, the sun is just terrible for capturing the beautiful lighting going on right now. It's at that threshold where it's always going to choose the foreground stuff and wash out the backgrounds. I'm sure there's solutions to that, but trust me, you're not seeing how awesome it is around me, the lighting, the subtle changes of hues. And it really wasn't until I started doing walks like this that I started to understand people who complained about the quality of the video in smartphones. And I do have to say, this generation, the Note 8, and I'm still on a iPhone 6 SE, which is pretty good and is getting me by, but the Note 8 generation of video is really very sweet, top notch. I often look at those images and think to myself, reality actually didn't look that good. I don't remember it being that high quality. But it's not in all cases, and I guess dynamic ranges where there's already dynamic ranges, double dynamic ranges, is where, you know, sacrifices need to be made, because the, you know, amount of processing power and camera sensitivity and such probably wouldn't have to be just ×2 to have 2 dynamic ranges of colors to pick up both kinds of subtleties of range. It would probably need, you know, cubed or you know, times to the power of 4 more processing power, depending on what it's trying to capture. You know, it's never just ×2. It's always at least ×4. That's like what they say when you're doing manipulations on a pixel image. The amount of memory that you should have available for swap space and workspace should not be that image again over there, like you're copying from A to B. It should be that image with 4 locations. This kind of precise control of available to required memory was important back in the days of the Amiga computer with Deluxe Paint. And many of the lessons that I learned from those days seem to apply oddly to today's world. And particularly surrounding issues of the technology priesthoods that exist, and how closely and when you should listen to them versus forging your own way, even though the stuff that you create, you know, is not going to be long-term, you know, stable, just because API interfaces change. You're never going to build anything that's going to run 24/7 worry-free. There's always going to be losing your login. Let's see, APIs changing, I already mentioned that. Services just going down from the provider. You know, internet traffic usage surges, slow packet delivery, that kind of thing. So there's lots and lots of variation in how things can go wrong when you're wiring up automations. And I guess that's where a lot of this is going to. Over the years, I've just been a very, very general technologist, specializing in nothing that was of great commercial interest, apparently. Search engine optimization was really the first thing where people were like, oh, we need that, we'll pay you to do that. And there's always been varying degrees of ethics issues surrounding it, being that, you know, you're just the invisible hand manipulator pushing around who's getting what traffic based on, you know, optimizations against a fairly well-known static system. You can optimize against static systems, and calling it search engine optimization is dissing Google, I gotta tell you that. You're saying you can optimize against a black box system because given certain known inputs, the state of the internet, here's the output, the search results that you get, and you can improve that to varying degrees using your own log file data, even though a lot of the keyword data that used to be passed to you by Google is no longer there. And you can modify it using data exports from your tracking software like Google Analytics. or from, again, Google Search Console, used to be Webmaster Tools, and then third-party vendors. Here's a URL, give me a history of that URL, whatever, I don't know, Internet Archive. There's all kinds of data sources, many, many data sources, and you can hit them all through Python, and you can join them to each other, knit them together into tables of data using pandas, which for those who are not in the know, is SQL. It's the concepts of SQL without the expensive, from a technical liability standpoint, technical liability, without having to have things that you need to know are being run and maintained 24/7. All you need to make sure is that that script is running on its scheduled basis. And if that server's down, maybe this other server can take over. So you can create conditions where you can just ensure that something's going to be running on a scheduled, reliable basis using just generic internet stuff. Any old web cloud server. I started to say web, but by the way, I just wanted to see if I can get the background. It's so beautiful. Yeah, no, it's not going to happen. I don't want to risk stopping the video or anything. So, yeah, so my point there, what was my point? This is when I would generally use pause. I ramble on, so don't I? There's Python, muscle memory, Linux, cron. People think Linux and scheduling, they think cron and the cron table. There's just so much wrong with that, I don't even know where to begin. So scheduling is best handled by Python. If you can hand control over to a Python script that you know is running and has access to the system clock, right? Python, single script, as long as it's not double running, right? And so you leave it to the systemd, and by the way, I'm just making sure I'm staying on the orange line, and I am. I'm here at, I guess, Broadway and Lafayette. I'm going to keep doing a little more walking because I'm on a nice roll. There's a new, different, whatever, alternative scheduler. And it's more than just a scheduler. It's a whole system service manager. So people kind of know this from the Microsoft world a lot. You know, there's system services. They're running quietly in the background, doing stuff so that the computer can be a server around you. Yeah, making sure that parts are talking to each other, like, you know, using software to wire up new hardware. That's what software is, new configurations of the hardware. So there's always invisible things going on in the background, and if you want to make those in the Linux world, the easiest way is to do them with the language of your choice, and then use the systemd scheduler to make sure it is constantly checked, to make sure it's running, and if it's not, respawning every 5 seconds. Is it running? Is it running? Is it running? And if it's not running, it respawns it. Consequently, that file becomes your top, your master, your hierarchically parent, master task, and everything gets nested from there. You import whatever Python scheduler package you want. I use the one called Schedule. I could use Sched that's built into the common library, but Schedule appears to offer certain advantages of concurrency and taking advantage of Python threading when you want to. And when you do use concurrency and threading, you are literally using the Python API for threading to create new threads. It's very literal and a great introduction to, you know, multi-threaded, which takes advantage of the operating system's ability to do concurrency instead of, let's see, what would it be? The operating system, the programming language? Yeah, well, so, you know, there's interesting stories about Python there. Global interpreter lock, and handing control of the system over to things that need a lock on the system because they're running in such a tweaked out, optimized fashion. Enter NumPy, which is the library that does all that fast linear math and algebra. That takes the place of things like native Python lists and tuples and dictionaries, which are built for dynamic use for the 80/20 use case. It's all the math people and science people who use fast matrices calculations. Which brings us to one of the fourth granddaddy languages, right? I left off at COBOL. Well, that fourth one is Fortran. Fortran is literally rocket science. It's the language that existed on IBM mainframes before operating systems were written for that hardware. The Fortran language was, in this case, the operating system. It goes back that far and is so perfectly tweaked out to that one use case. Now remember, high-level languages are made for specialty uses in particular problem domains, air flight control, architecture, what have you. Everything has its own sets of parameters of how things need to work in order to not kill people, satisfy stakeholders, whatever. Be competitive in the marketplace. And let's see, where was I there? Yeah, so when a programming language has it at birth, as Fortran did, it tends to stay around because it gets a following of the people who have, impact and influence everything that has happened since. So Fortran still exists. You can download it and learn it, or you can just get to know the NumPy package on pandas. On Python. I'm jumping ahead, Freudian slip. The NumPy package on Python, so that you can do all that math stuff. And then you can layer on top of that many other packages, such as pandas, which lets you do SQL stuff using a very Pythonic version of joins, inner and outers, and lefts and rights, and all that stuff that and unions versus concatenations and merges, all that control of all the different ways you can put lists together. That's Python's pandas, and the only difference between that and SQL is the API is much, much, much easier under pandas, less English-like, less flowing, more structured. And you don't need those long-term, persistent, heavyweight database systems there, so that you can simply use a language that can manipulate tables. If you got the tables, take them from anywhere. It inputs and outputs CSV files like it's nothing. And once again, perpetuating the life of CSV files in the technology world. But you could just as easily output other stuff or connect it to other databases. If you wanted to back-end Pandas stuff with a real database, you can do that too. And then there's all kinds of other tricks that I plan on doing, like the building 24-hour cache, decorator cache that I hear Raymond Hedinger talk about. And I'm going to find that, I'm going to use that, build it into the system, and then I'm going to use some kind of back-ending system to the Shelf API to make sure it can optionally just be offloaded to Amazon S3. So I got the blinking red light. I'm going to do another pass of my entire Pipulate system, fixing all the mistakes I've done in the past. It's already sort of out there. You can pip install Pipulate from the PyPy directory and blit information in from a Google spreadsheet, manipulate it in a Pandas data frame, and blit that identical shape. You got to keep the shape compatible, back out, and bam, you've created a dashboard in Google Sheets. And it's going to be pretty big, and I'm going to label this thing Data Master. Advocate my particular blend of data mastering, which is Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, but starting out in Jupyter Notebook in the process of getting your stuff over to a scheduler. Generic Linux scheduler, generic Linux. Everything you need for the 80/20 rule, satisfaction of every problem you'll encounter in every problem domain for the next 10 to 30 years. Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. Thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you again soon. And don't forget to stop. I'm not going to stop there. Stop. Take a look around you and notice some details, because it could make all the difference. Narrate things to yourself in your head as you walk, just as if you were shooting this video, which I'm up to a half hour on. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe. See you at VidCon.